It is always an honor and pleasure to be part of the 100 Innovation Summit. I had the good fortune to attend the summit in person last year. And while we can't be there today, this time around, we are glad that we are able to still connect and share in the joy of recognizing 100 global innovations in education. Also, thank you to the previous speakers and innovators who have spoken about their innovations, which is setting the tone for this very exciting panel. I have four very interesting people joining me on this panel. We have Cristobal Cobo, who's an education specialist, a senior education specialist at the World Bank. We have Christina Lowery, who's the CEO at Girl Rising. We have Diaz, who's an education and financial literacy head at Bancolombia. And we have Guilherme, Cintra, who's the executive director at Eleva Next. What we're going to explore further, in addition to everything that the speakers have said earlier, is certain innovations and opportunities that come from challenging environments. And then the question that we're exploring is, what if quality education comes from the most challenging environments around the globe? If I look at our own example in India, and we heard Sonal speak a bit about some of the challenges India has faced through the pandemic. What we have seen in India in terms of education innovations at scale in the complex demography of India has been quite fascinating. We have seen education being delivered through loudspeakers, in vans, traveling around neighborhoods, and teachers teaching using loudspeakers with social distancing norms. There's been use of community radio. Schools have set up peer community groups where older young people living in those communities have set up groups to teach younger children. We've had parents taking on a much more intentional and active role in learning. We've had governments who have set up IVRS systems where parents can call in and give a missed call, and then they get a call back with a lesson plan. And they can sit around with their children or with children in the community at home and run through the lesson plan. We've seen disruption happen, but we've also seen innovation happen. And our attempt today is to continue to explore this. So I'm going to first invite Cristobal Cobo. From your lens, working at the World Bank, what are some of the challenges, opportunities, and innovations you have come across? And what really have been some of your insights as we are exploring education in this new environment? Cristobal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Thank you to Danny and to all the 100 team for this amazing World Cup of education in which we are all winners. It's such an inspiring moment. Let me start saying that in the times of COVID, we have learned that we are facing a twin crisis: school closure and economic recession. On the one side, before the pandemic, we already had what the World Bank calls the learning poverty. 50% of 10 years old kids from low and middle income countries cannot read and understand a simple text. Now, in addition, we encounter that the learning loss that this pandemic is bringing is particularly threatening the most vulnerable. We have learned that if appropriate support is not provided, this health crisis can have long-term implications in our society, expanding existing inequalities and expanding as well the divide between urban and rural, between those who have access and those without, between those kids who receive support at home and those who don't. But you know what? It doesn't have to be that way. The pandemic has made more and more evident the importance of reducing the existing digital divide. It is quite clear that the digital divide hits countries in very different ways. In some cases, the main gap is on access to electricity, connectivity, and devices, while in other cases, this digital divide affects access to high-quality contents, appropriate teacher training, or effective pedagogies for teaching remotely. I think today it's time to rethink how technologies can support learning. Therefore, it will be critical to have a broader understanding of this idea of digital ecosystem, which also include low-tech solutions like radio and television. Technology alone won't make any difference if schools don't have the digital infrastructure, meaning connection, electricity, devices, and contents, human infrastructure, meaning training and support, and logistic, securing funding, monitoring, technical assistance. We have learned these days how important is the school as a social institution, as a critical space where students not only have access to educational resources, but where they develop social skills and fundamental values for living in society. We have learned that today that learning is not only a transactional practice, but it's a relational one, not limited to only delivering contents, but when there is a space for connecting, for feedback, for guidance, for support, and also for having fun. At the same time, what we have seen is that learning can happen anytime and anywhere when basic access to educational resources and the required support that either teachers or parents can provide. There's a necessity to invest more wisely and better, designing strategies for recovery plans, as well as for remedial education practices to support those who might be left behind. However, if we really want to make a difference, and let me emphasize this, if we really want to make a difference, it probably won't be because we simply manage to get back to business as usual, but how we take advantage of this opportunity to rethink the schools, not as a place, but as an experience that goes beyond the classroom. This is also an unprecedented opportunity to rethink educational systems, reimagine the learning organizations, empower the role of teachers, our superheroes, and perhaps reimagine what it means to learn. Let me finish saying this. Despite the challenges that we have previously mentioned, it is also true that we have seen a wealth of experiences that are becoming a garden of innovation that are blooming everywhere in the world. And today, more than ever, education systems are called to become learning organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristobal. I think you've laid out the challenge and the opportunity that we're sitting on. And I love the way you framed it. One is opening up the understanding of digital infrastructure, expanding that, asking us to reflect on what is learning and looking at learning as a relational concept, looking at learning as an anytime, anywhere concept, and also focusing on recovery versus remedial. And you've really kind of opened it up from that lens. And as I go to the next speaker, as I invite Christina, I want to probably focus on one critical aspect of the challenge and how, Christina, you have seen it being addressed, is girls' education, or now the impact of this pandemic on girls' education. In India, we are already seeing, for example, where families, because of the economic crisis, have lost their livelihoods and incomes. They're deprioritizing girls' education. In many households, we're beginning to see girls are beginning to take on more household roles, more adult roles. And of course, as Sonal spoke about, the increase in abuse and violence and neglect that is happening, which I also can hazard that it's probably happening more with young women and girls. So Christina, maybe you could throw some reflection on the impact on girls and young women, and what are the innovations and opportunities you see happening? You're muted there, Christina.
Thank you. Absolutely, and thank you so much. Thank you, Cristobal. I'm going to pick up on many of the themes you touched on, and I have to say I love the last phrase you mentioned, a garden of innovation that's blooming. That's a good image to hold on to. So first, a bit about Girl Rising. Girl Rising is an international nonprofit whose mission is to use the power of storytelling to change the way the world values girls and their education. We're currently working in 11 countries with over 120 local partners who work with adolescent girls and boys, mostly in school settings, but also in out-of-school contexts. And our work with them involves adapting the Girl Rising curriculum, a story-based curriculum designed to help develop voice and agency and confidence in girls, build social emotional skills and self-awareness for both girls and boys, and critically to help both girls and boys explore and challenge the harmful social norms that narrowly dictate what girls and boys can be. So what is the situation for girls? Even before COVID-19 struck, more than 129 million school-age girls worldwide were not in school, according to UNESCO. And now, due to ripple effects from the pandemic, some predict that an additional 12 million girls who were in classrooms last March will never return to the classroom. So there already was an education crisis for girls, and now the crisis has gotten worse. And like you just said, being at home, out of school, with the stresses of economic hardships that so many families are facing, it means girls are experiencing increased physical and sexual violence, increased early and forced marriage, unintended pregnancies, and shouldering an unequal burden of domestic responsibilities and adult roles. And though going digital seems the natural way forward in education, the truth is that this may be deepening and compounding inequality and the digital divide. So for a bit more context, and I know my colleagues here have mentioned about technology. The reality is girls and women do not have equal access to technology in many countries. So technology-based solutions, though promising for many, are compounding this inequality. And I'll stick with the example of India. A few numbers. In 2017, out of a population of 350 million Indians who have access to the internet, merely 29% are women. And the OECD in 2018 reported that 12% of women in India do not use the internet owing to negative social perception associated with its use. And that less than 30% own a mobile phone. So the innovations I want to point out today, because I also think that we're seeing a garden of innovation blooming around the world, especially at the community level, are all about serving the population of girls that either have no access to technology or only to what's considered low-end technology. All of these come from our work with our community-based partners who are working both in urban and in rural settings. So the first is innovation on how to deliver content and connect with girls. The second is the innovation in the intentional inclusion of parents and families in that delivery of content and programming. And the third is the content itself that prioritizes social emotional well-being, inspiration, and awareness about discriminatory gender norms and resilience. All of the above are scalable and informative, I think, to the wider education sector. So in terms of the how, the methods of engaging girls, in India, for example, we collaborated with our partner Slam Out Loud to redesign art-based social emotional activities to be accessed by low-tech devices like simple flip phones and delivered over WhatsApp and also using interactive voice recording, as you mentioned. These have been adopted by multiple state governments, and as a result, over 4 million kids, typically in government schools, are receiving these activities regularly, mostly on their parents' phone. In Guatemala, we worked with local partners to turn the Girl Rising curriculum into a radio program, reaching girls in rural areas who have no chance of connecting with learning via technology. And we combined those radio programs with printed material that was also delivered to the homes of these girls. And in Kenya, we collaborated to create also printed at-home learning guides delivered to 20,000 families in the informal settlements of Kibera. So what's innovative about these is the utilization of older technology, as others have already said, and that all of them are not just reaching girls, but really importantly engaging their parents and their families in their learning. The other critical innovation, as I mentioned, is around the content itself. The reality of why so many girls do not persist in school and do not graduate from secondary school is multi-layered, of course. But one of the biggest barriers are the social norms and expectations of what a girl can be and do. And I want to share with you a very short excerpt from a poem that I think beautifully illustrates what these norms are for adolescent girls. It was written by Eki Ogwiji from Nigeria. She recently won a storytelling challenge that we conducted. And here's what she wrote. Why is girlhood designed like an internship program for marriage? Why is the news of the arrival of a man's fourth girl child passed quietly, like an internal memo written on the midwife's lips and signed by his wife's sigh? So the innovation that we are focused on at Girl Rising is using the power of storytelling to change this, to work hand in hand with local partners to change these internal memos about the way societies value girls and their futures. So through powerful and intimate stories about real girls, through media campaigns and educational tools and on-the-ground programs and partnerships, we're working to change the attitudes and harmful norms that narrowly dictate what a girl and woman can do and be. And we help build the skills and mindsets of girls so that they can pursue futures of their choosing. This kind of learning, building confidence, voice, agency, joy, as someone also mentioned, joy of learning, self-awareness, and positive gender attitudes is now being recognized by more and more governments at this time as critical components of quality education and not just nice to haves. So this is our innovation. To change the future for girls, we must change the story. We must reach not only girls and give them the skills and develop the mindsets for them to stay in school, but we also must reach those around her parents, her brothers, her teachers, and her community leaders to build a community of support. Because we need these girls. We need their contributions, their talents, and their ideas. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Christina. We are running a bit under time, so I'll quickly go to the next speaker, Laura. Laura, one of the things I think might be interesting for you to explore is the urban-rural challenge and how that has played out in the pandemic and what are some of the innovations that you have done or experienced in communities. So Laura, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Vishal, and thank you everyone at HundrED and everyone watching us right now. I'm actually very glad that Christina mentioned rural girls and what's happening in rural areas, and I take that together with what Cristobal mentioned and focus on, how that gap is just growing because of COVID. There's not that much connectivity. Bancolombia Foundation works right now only in Colombia with our education strategy. And what we've been focusing on is rural areas because the gap there was already pretty wide. But with COVID, it has exacerbated. So what we've been trying to do is, if we don't have the connectivity infrastructure, and it requires a large investment, not just from the government, but also private sector to make it happen, we decided to knock on some doors and try to find some partners to help us with this. I'll give you an example with one of our literacy programs. It was made to happen in person, and we couldn't do that because of COVID. So we actually called Juan Manuel, the speaker we saw a little while ago from Tommy, and I asked Juan Manuel, hey, how can we take our program to these rural schools that don't have any connectivity whatsoever, but also help in the training of the teachers into their digital skills, because rural teachers don't have that much access to training here in Colombia because of how remote they are. And actually right now, 20 of our schools are being delivered their own TOMI with some curriculum that is already uploaded into the TOMI. And actually we're taking it to indigenous rural schools that don't have any access whatsoever to internet, but that they will have everything they need in that TOMI right there. So you can innovate with just, bringing this small pieces of technology that already have the training for the teachers at school. And that takes me to my second point, the skill building that needs to happen. And that's part of the gap that we're seeing with rural areas and urban areas right now. And skill building needs the teachers to be trained first so that they actually can deliver this to the kids. And with this, we actually work also with another HundrED innovator, which is CoSchool. And they've helped us build this program for social and emotional skills that can be taken to teachers, but also to students. And we actually do it through WhatsApp. Because that's another tool that we found out that we can use during these times, and because we're involving parents. And I like the fact that Christina mentioned, that you need to do an intentional inclusion of parents in what you're doing. And since the parents are the owners of the phones, We do activities that involve the parents. They make it easier for them to do the homeschooling, because that's what's happening right now. Teachers are sending messages through WhatsApp, but the parents are the ones that have to make it happen at home, and they don't have any idea how to do it well, and they're getting frustrated. So what we're trying to do with partners like CoSchool, and also partners like Red Goalie Pass, which is our operator for soccer team skill building programs. We are involving parents. We're working through WhatsApp. We're sending videos. We are also doing radio shows. Actually, just yesterday, they were telling me that they actually took a van with a speaker in the back with the radio program, because that specific community couldn't get access to radio where we needed it. So yes, we're called to innovate in how we're operating, but just as a last point, because Cristobal also mentioned funding, and we are changing things in funding as well here at Bancolombia Foundation, because we're joining other partners like Canada and the Ministry of Education in creating a results-based fund, and that actually makes a change in how social programs are operated in Colombia. Mostly we were based on traditional philanthropy. You have $100, you donate $100, and a foundation uses them in a social program. But right now, we're changing that. We're joining trends all around the world that have impact funds that are doing impact investment. So now we have this results-based fund. And what we're trying to do is that, yes, we're going to pay for the cost of implementation, but we're going to give a premium for the results you're obtaining, because we want results. We don't want just to look good, because we're a corporate foundation. People may think, well, they're just doing that to look good, but not quite. We want changes, and we want systemic change. That's what we're trying to drive. So those are the three things I wanted to share with you guys. Also, use the HundrED community. They were so helpful during this time for us, honestly. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. What I'm taking away is intentional inclusion of parents, innovative ways to fundraise, and partnering with the right kind of partners. So I want to move to Guilherme. You have spoken about tools that you have developed for teachers and school leaders and the larger community. I think that's a very important concept to talk into. So over to you. You're muted.
Great. So thanks very much before anything. I'm sorry if there is any noise here. It's a bit hectic. I'm just in the middle of a moving. But what I'd like to say and talk to you about is actually what Laura has said, which is the way you should get all the community together to actually make any changes in terms of innovation. It's not only going into only to the kids, but all the stakeholders should be part of it. So I worked as an investment funds focused on impact in education. I worked as a teacher for public and private schools. I worked as a product owner, and nowadays I had this innovation strategy. And that made sure that I could understand a little bit about the EdTech context, and to understand something that is very simple and very complex at the same time, which is the tools that we have for education are not the best ones, are not the most advanced in terms of technology, but the most ancient ones. What I always say to the people that work with me is that our main focus when we talk about EdTech is actually making sure people have great conversations. This is the most important technology that we might be able to use. And that made sure, when Christina talked about storytelling, that's something that really connects with me, because what I always say is that if we really want to use data as a meaningful manner, is not only about connectivity, but also about data literacy. And data literacy is something that we're working on to make sure that school principals can understand, and school teachers, and actually their students themselves and parents. And what we do with that is that we always tell people data tells a story. And so I always say, I always look at people using data in a very complex manner. What I always try to do with my team is making sure the user experience is an experience where a teacher can actually look at a table of content, and in 2 minutes can use what they know about the students in the context together with the data to actually make sure they have great conversation with the kids. to make sure that the kids have what they need to actually like e-learning. What makes sure that we can actually like try that and use that is that where you have one of the main, with the most exciting labs in the world when you talk about education. We have a network of schools that have about 80,000 kids right now in really different contexts in Brazil. We have people in big cities, but we also have people that are in like the borders of Paraguay, from really low income class students to really high end students. And what is really clear whenever we talk about innovation is that context matters. And because of that, if we don't empower people to actually understand the stories of each and every one of the students, we will not be able to actually leverage on the data in a meaningful and effective manner. We will always be able to diagnose things, but how can we actually act on that? And so with that, we have all the systems that we have, they are really connected, and the data is connected throughout all the schools. And that makes sure that we can actually like use this data to have value added to the universities that help us to understand the gaps that we have and to build technology to actually act on that. So one of the examples we just did this research with a foundation that showed that in our schools, and that's not probably something that happens only in our schools, the students are being, having their grades being lower or higher based on their behavior. And that's something we actually were able to show that we also have some biases against Black boys. And that's something really important to understand when you look at the context. Of course, this is probably not some biases that are conscious, but we have to understand that so we can actually like have the great conversations that are needed for teachers to understand what is needed for the students to thrive and to understand that maybe we're doing something that's not the most appropriate when we talk about the quality of education and the context that we are building. And so what we want to build in the future was what we call an adaptive school. Because of course it's a little joke with adaptive platforms. Adaptive platforms are really interesting and really important, but they're not enough. When we talk about stakeholders in the school and the engagement with the community, adaptive platforms are one of these things. The school has to be adaptive, and to be able to have adaptive schools that are context-based, we actually have to have data flowing through the people in ways people can actually understand it, tell a story about the students, connect with one another. And in a context where we have in Brazil a very difficult career path to teachers, where they probably are going to 5 or 6 different schools, if we don't have the data to connect these people in the best conversation possible, we are not able to build on that, on their knowledge and their understanding of each one of the kids, together with data that, of course, nobody is able to gather in their own heads to have the best conversations possible, to actually leverage on adaptive schools to build the community that are needed for each one of the students that we have. What we really want to be able to build, and it's going to be great to talk to you afterwards, Christina, Laura, Cristobal, Vishal, is how can we actually leverage on that to take that to really different contexts and make sure conversations are building in ways that are meaningful to each and every one of the students. We're beginning in a lab, what I say, which is like a private school system with 80,000 kids with a very specific context, but in Brazil, but we want to be able to make sure that we understand the meaningful talks and conversation that happen each and every one of the days that we are building the skill community. And it's going to be great to talk to you about how that can be done in context as the rural ecosystems or Colombia or different contexts that we might be facing and to collaborate on that. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and let's have another great conversation right now, which is pretty important for us.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we won't have time to take any questions. But what I am taking away is there is a garden of blooming innovations out there. We need to be changing narratives around girls and girls' education. We need to have an intentional inclusion of parents. We need to focus on partnerships and collective action. And content matters, and we need to look at adaptive schools and great conversations.